What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with a spoiler-free review for Presence, directed by Steven Soderbergh, coming to theaters later this week. And this is officially my first positive movie review of 2025. And I don't want to overstate the case. It's a really solid horror movie, perhaps even a really good horror movie. But like in the last 12 months, we've been spoiled rotten by so many great horror movies. It's becoming increasingly difficult to stand out. And in 2025, we're seeing no signs that the horror genre is going to slow down anytime soon. I'm really looking forward to Companion, The Monkey, Sinners. 28 years later, there's a lot of potentially really good horror on the calendar. But Steven Soderbergh, who to my knowledge has never directed a horror movie, is getting the year started with a bang after last week's catastrophically terrible Wolfman, a movie which I absolutely loathed and despised. But I'm just blown away that Steven Soderbergh, after all these decades of making movies, still has a few surprises up his sleeve, because I've been following his career for a very long time, and I can't claim to have seen all of his work in TV, but I've seen every single feature that he's ever made, except for his last one. What was it, Magic Mike's Last Dance? I was like, you know what, I have no interest in seeing Magic Mike's Last Dance. I love you, Steven Soderbergh, but that movie was just not made with my warped sensibilities in mind. But the guy's got dozens and dozens of movies to his name, and in the late 90s, I was completely, totally obsessed. Of all the independent filmmakers who emerged in the late 80s and early 90s, really the peak or the high watermark of the American independent film movement, Steven Soderbergh has had one of the most successful careers by far. He's definitely the most prolific. I mean, some might argue that Tarantino's better, or I don't know if you would include the Coen brothers because they got started a little earlier, but if we include the Coen brothers, they definitely would be mentioned in Soderbergh's company. Or Richard Linklater, he's had an incredibly prolific career. But Steven Soderbergh has basically tackled every genre of every conceivable budget size. Sometimes he makes micro-budget movies, and this movie, Presence, is definitely on the smaller end of things. And sometimes he does big, giant blockbusters like the Ocean's 11 trilogy that he did in the early 2000s. It's almost like there's no genre or subject matter that he regards as like not being within his realm of interest. But now, finally, after all these years as a filmmaker, where he really got off to a bang in the late 80s with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, a movie which I unreservedly love, but I'm thrilled to see he's actually really good at making horror movies, even if you might argue that I won't say that it's gimmicky, but it relies upon one very overt technique where the entire movie is from the point of view of the presence. And without going into too much detail about the presence, here's the official synopsis from IMDb. One sentence: a family becomes convinced they are not alone after moving into their new home in the suburbs. And that one sentence synopsis more or less gets the job done without teasing what the real central storyline is going to be. Because initially there are a lot of, how can I say this? Like, not red herrings, but there are a variety of subplots that are unfolding with this family. We're like, all right, is this the main story, or is this the main story? Like, what's going on here? And then about halfway through, like, oh, I know where this is going. But it kept me on my toes, and it kept me happily surprised throughout. And the movie is heartbreakingly short. It's only 85 minutes long, and I'm always complaining about most movies being too long. This is one of those movies where I got to the end, I was like, that's it? Like, there's not more? Which is a very refreshing experience to have when watching a movie. Because if you think a movie's too short, you can always watch it again. But if I were to make the case for Presence without giving anything away, it's got a ton of atmosphere. Like, it definitely has a great supernatural atmosphere, relying upon very simple tricks. Because once again, it's a low-budget movie. There's no big crazy digital effects. It's more or less things like, bookshelves falling and that sort of thing, or glasses rattling and blah, blah, blah. But you definitely believe the supernatural side, and the characters do a great job, or the actors do a great job of selling you on their horror, and they're just like the overall, just their reactions to the supernatural phenomena that are unfolding around them. But also, you get really invested in several of their stories. And I won't say that these characters are perfect people, and like some of them are more noble than others. But like with any family, it's got some dysfunctionality, and some people in the family act like assholes from time to time. And sometimes they need to be called up by their other family members. Be nicer to your sister, or be nicer to your husband, or be nicer to whomever. But the family is incredibly believable, and the family is played by Lucy Liu, who's great, Chris Sullivan, Kalina Liang, who I'd never seen in a movie before, but she was fantastic, and Eddie Medei, who plays Tyler. But because the interactions between these family members are so raw and so adversarial, and at times so loving, when things really start to get a little crazy with the plot, you're much more invested in their final fate. It's a little bit like family members that are always constantly arguing with one another until there is a death in the family or a natural catastrophe where they all kind of come together. I felt a little bit the same way about my reaction to the family as I was watching them on the screen. Initially, I was like, oh, some of these characters aren't as likable as the others, but by the end, you are completely, totally invested in the family dynamic, and you want them all to more or less, have a happy ending. I won't tell you if they're happy endings or not, but you'll at least be rooting for a happy ending after you get invested in the lives of these characters. But the main character of this movie, the feature attraction of this movie, is the camera work. The camera work is just absolutely exhilarating. And I need to look up the DP right now. I'm not sure if the DP was also the operator. Once again, it's a low-budget movie, but cinematography by Steven Soderbergh. Once upon a time, he used to do cinematography under the name of his father. There was some weird union regulation where, anyway, I don't know all the ins and outs, but I remember there was a period where he would be his own operator and his own DP, but he wasn't allowed to get credit for it. But he got up to speed with his camera work very early on in his career. But this is some of the best camera work by Soderbergh that I've ever seen, because while the camera is always kind of floating about in this ominous way, but I guess much like with the movie Schizopolis, Soderbergh is the secret star of this movie. If he's the one who is operating the camera, well, then he's definitely one of the chief characters in the story. He's the character that we stick with the entire time. And it was incredible how much emotion he was able to generate from certain camera movements, like when he will dramatically push in very abruptly on a certain character, or the way he'll kind of retreat around a corner like a character. You completely believe in the spirit and the personality of the presence without necessarily ever, once again, I don't want to give away any spoilers. Let's just say the character is not exactly like a presence like a ghost out of Hamlet who's going to like offer like big soliloquies to the characters and that sort of thing. It's more just like an ominous presence, but it has so much personality, but it's personality that is achieved through camera movements, not through dialogue. And I thought that was the most remarkable achievement of the movie. But writer David Koepp also deserves a huge amount of credit as well, because the screenplay he's written, it does a great thing where it is funny at times without breaking the tension or the suspense or just the overall atmosphere of the movie, where the audience was kind of nervously kind of tittering or chuckling, whatever you want to use, whatever word you want to use. But oftentimes it's because they were laughing at just like the teenage dialogue between the brother and the sister is particularly good. Like just like the way they're mean to each other and like the way they gossip with their friends. It's very believable. A lot of writers in Hollywood really struggle to write characters that are either a child or a teenager, where they always sound like a precocious adult or just the world's biggest brat. But like, yeah, there are a lot of Hollywood writers who don't know how to write children at all. And I'm sure he probably got a lot of input from the actors as well. But I have a lot of younger siblings that are in their early 20s. And let's just say that I found the dialogue to be eerily believable in terms of how people around that age interact with each other and their preoccupations with their social lives and their academic careers and their athletic careers and that sort of thing. Yeah, so high five to David Koepp, high five to Steven Soderbergh, and high five to the entire cast. But goddamn, Neon has got another cool horror movie on their hands. And I love how, at a time where it's so easy to be so critical about the movie industry, when there's so many loathsome trends on display, but the two premier kind of Rolls-Royce brands when it comes to foreign films and independent films, like basically prestige art house movies, Neon and A24, both of them are going all in on the horror genre. And some of them are a little bit more prestigious or grown up or more sophisticated than others, but they're just recognizing like at a time where there's such an alarming lack of originality in a lot of mainstream genre entertainment, it's within the horror genre that we're seeing so many groundbreaking, exciting new stories. But these are aging veterans who told this story, because David Koepp, the screenwriter, he's been around for a long time. While David Koepp has written plenty of trash throughout his incredible career, I mean, he's one of the most prolific, successful screenwriters of the last couple decades, but he also wrote Spider-Man, and he wrote Jurassic Park, and he wrote Mission Impossible, the Brian De Palma film with Tom Cruise, and he wrote one of my all-time favorite movies directed by Brian De Palma, or one of my all-time favorite movies, period. He wrote Carlito's Way, which is fucking awesome. It was an adaptation of a book, but anybody who writes Carlito's Way, he's got some chops, and here he is. It's almost like he's decided, you know what, I'm tired of writing these big, bloated, awful movies like Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull or Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, two movies that I just totally despise. It's like, why don't I just go back and make a down and dirty little low-budget movie with a filmmaker who is capable of making great movies at any budget? And apparently they sold it to Neon for $5 million after Neon saw it at a film festival. And it's funny, when you look at the career of Steven Soderbergh, it seems like sometimes he's making ultra low budget movies by choice and sometimes by necessity, because after he made Sex, Lies, and Videotape and just everybody declared him to be the next big thing, and he was, he had a couple of movies in a row where no matter what you might think of them in terms of how good they are, and some of them are really good, they failed to resonate, they failed to find an audience, and it looked like he was going to be a flash in the pan and his career was going to be over as soon as it had begun. And then he did one of the smartest things that I've ever seen a filmmaker do. He decided to scale all the way back and make a movie for, I think, $250,000. He made Schizopolis, starring himself. And it was hysterical. It was absolutely hilarious. It's an experimental movie. I mean, experimental with a capital E. It is not mainstream entertainment. But if you like that bizarre, esoteric sense of humor that he has, Schizopolis will be right up your alley. But then it was successful, and suddenly he was bankable again, and he entered what I think is the most interesting part of his career, the late 90s, early 2000s, and right around 99, 2000, I was completely, totally obsessed with Steven Soderbergh. He was one of my favorite working directors at that time. I read this great book by him called Getting Away with It, where he tackles his own career, but he's also interviewing director Richard Lester, talking about his career. But starting with Schizopolis, he went into a serious hot streak where he had Grey's Anatomy, which is more or less like an essay movie with Spalding Gray. You could call him he's basically a monologue specialist. He's kind of a comedian, but he's more into monologues, but very experimental movie. Then we had Out of Sight in 1998. Still, I think, one of the most entertaining movies of the 1990s. Definitely one of the most entertaining adaptations of any novel by Elmore Leonard. And Elmore Leonard has a lot of great movies based on his books, like 3:10 to Yuma and Jackie Brown and things like that. But Out of Sight, I feel like at any time, like for any audience member of any age at any time can watch Out of Sight and fall in love with the work of Steven Soderbergh. And it's a strong contender for the best movie that either George Clooney or Jennifer Lopez ever made. I mean, the sex appeal in that trunk scene is just outstanding. But then Soderbergh made what I think is his best movie, The Limey, in 1999, which was much smaller in scale than Out of Sight, and once again, much more experimental, but a down and dirty, kick-ass little gangster movie about a limey coming to L.A. and just wreaking havoc. And then Soderbergh enjoyed a level of success that very few directors ever get to experience, because in 2000, he released two movies, Aaron Brockovich and Traffic. And it was a crazy situation where both movies got nominated for a ton of Academy Awards, and both movies managed to win some Academy Awards. I mean, Julia Roberts won her Oscar for Best Actress, and Steven Soderbergh won for Best Director on Traffic, but both movies were nominated for Best Picture. They ultimately ended up losing to Gladiator, but I feel like any year where Gladiator comes out, and at the same time you're competing with two movies that are multiple awards contenders, I mean, very few directors ever get to enjoy those heights, and I imagine he was like, how long can I sustain this level of success? And I guess the answer is indefinitely, because he has never stopped making TV shows and movies ever since. Even though he's threatened retirement or retired several times, he always comes back and he always manages to make interesting movies or interesting shows. And I read an interview with him at one point where he was talking about how you get to a certain point in your career where you've gone on so many location scouts, like for your next movie, you're like, oh my God, can I really pretend to be excited getting in the van with the crew and going to visit a house or going to visit an apartment, see if you want to shoot there? It's like just going through the grind. But he's so goddamn good at it, and he's one of the most experienced filmmakers walking the earth. I feel like it would be a crime for him ever to retire entirely, because since that great heyday of the late 90s and early 2000s where I was really obsessed with his career, he's managed to make a lot of really, really cool stuff. Like, I wasn't the world's biggest fan of the Ocean's 11 trilogy, but it was wildly popular. People love those movies. They made shitloads of money. But the movies that I've really enjoyed since the great heyday, Girlfriend Experience has some interesting moments, but I wouldn't say it's great overall. Contagion got very popular again during COVID. Haywire was a good action movie starring Gina Carano. It has some really, really good fight scenes. What else do I like? Behind the Candelabra is a wild movie. Logan Lucky is absolutely hysterical. That was one of the earliest movies that I reviewed on this channel when I got it started back in the day. Unsane is a pretty cool thriller. High Flying Bird, if you're into hoops, that's good. No Sudden Move is a pretty cool gangster movie. I enjoyed Kimmy. So yeah, in the 21st century, none of the shows and movies that he's created in the 21st century are like, oh my God, these are fucking amazing.
I mean, when he finally pulled it out and I could look at it and touch it, I completely forgot that there was a guy attached to it. I remember literally being startled when the guy spoke to me.
But they're always very solid and very well produced and very well executed. And even if he never makes a movie again that is as strong as that great early period between Sex, Lies, and Videotape and a movie like The Lie Me, like that first 10-year period, I remain a big fan of his work. And I just like how he's exploring new frontiers, new terrain, new genres. And like I said, the fact that he, as the operator and cinematographer on this movie, was able to have such a huge influence on the overall story. It's one of the main characters. I just think it's a remarkable achievement. And I think making the occasional low-budget movie is the real key to his success, because it allows him to tell different types of stories that you would never be allowed to tell with considerably larger budgets. And it allows him just to explore different techniques, different approaches to filmmaking, and then he's ready to hurl himself into these larger projects. We have a fucking thriller coming from him like 6 weeks. Hang on, what's the name of that movie? But he's got this big giant movie, Black Bag, coming in March. So I don't know if he'll pull a repeat of 2000 when he had two major movies back to back. But I do think occasionally slowing down and making weird little esoteric movies for very little money. Movies like, was it Full Frontal back in 2002? Like, he made that movie for like $5, where the actors, he's like, whatever clothes you're wearing when you arrive on set, those are the clothes you'll be wearing in the movie. So dress well. Like that is a low budget movie. And he made a movie like that at the time, right after Ocean's 11, as a way of just kind of cleansing his palate and recharging his batteries. And he also does really good film commentary as well. I already mentioned earlier that book, Getting Away with It, where he's got some great film commentary. But one of my favorite film commentary tracks ever is on the Blu-ray for Point Blank, where John Boorman, living legend, I mean, he made friggin' Deliverance and Point Blank and Excalibur, Zardoz, and all these wild movies. But John Boorman and Steven Soderbergh sit down and do a commentary track for Point Blank. And it's just so cool hearing Soderbergh as like the movie fan, but also incredibly experienced filmmaker, incredibly successful filmmaker, just making observations to the director about what he admires about his technique and how he achieved certain effects. And so, yeah, if you're a fan of Lee Marvin, and if you're a fan of the books of Richard Stark, a.k.a. Donald Westlake, that is one of the best adaptations of his book, but it's got that great commentary track. So, yeah, Steven Soderbergh, at this point in his career, he was born in 1963, so he's 62 years old already, because his birthday was on January 14th. He could just totally retire and do whatever he wants with the rest of his life, but it seems like he's still excited by the process. He's still excited by the medium. But I feel like I've been going quite a ways at this point without offering any criticism of any kind, so I'll say this. There are a few side characters that are brought in about halfway through to observe the presence or react to the presence or give advice related to the presence. I'm trying to be as vague as humanly possible. Those characters are less well written and the performances are less interesting, but they're gone in a matter of minutes. I mean, this movie, like I said before, it is lean and mean and wastes no time. And I do think it's a great exercise in how to create tension and suspense purely from camera movements, as opposed to music or CGI or jump scares or any of the crap that we see in movies by people like, Blumhouse. I can't stand Blumhouse, as people probably gathered on this channel in recent months, where I've talked a lot of trash about Blumhouse movies. This is quite a different experience. And if what you want is kind of like that James Wan Conjuring style horror movie, you're not going to get it from Presence. But if you want to see a masterclass in camera work and a masterclass in really just warm human interactions, I think people are going to be delighted by Presence. I don't think it's going to be the best movie of 2025. I don't think it's going to be the best horror movie of 2025. But it's definitely going to get some attention, and I imagine it'll be on a lot of top 10 lists by the end of the year. In any event, those are my thoughts on Presence. It's definitely worth throwing down your hard-earned money to see it in the theater. I'm very fired up to review Companion next week, and then The Monkey 2 weeks after that. But I'll be seeing Flight Risk this week, so that'll be my next review. But I should also plug my appearance on Chainsaw Reacts later this week. On Wednesday night at 9, he's going to do a big live stream where his format for his live streams, he just brings in more and more YouTubers over the course of the show talking about the news or pop culture or whatever, until there's like several dozen people talking about Superman or whatever. there. I have no idea if I'll just kind of disappear and as like one of the tiles, or if I'll get a chance to talk. Who knows? But I'm excited to be included, and I was flattered to be asked. So I'll be doing that on Wednesday night. So if you're a fan of Chainsaw Reacts, check me out on Wednesday evening. But thank you so much for watching this video. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.